Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammers so we can clear a path to the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the Umbral Web this episode are...
Yeah, I'm Paul. And guys, you know, like the Daughters of Khaine, they're all from Olgu and stuff. And this whole Harkiron thing, it's almost like a vacation. You know what I'd call it? A dock holiday.
I am Josh, and I'm here to talk about the Umbral believable lore of the Daughters of Khaine.
I like that.
And I'm Will, and just like the High Gladiatrix, I have to ask, are you not entertained?
Awesome. Very good. And mine's not as good as your guys's. And I'm Aaron, and I call my girls the Daughters of Lame. Because I'm lame, you guys. It was a self-burn. Those are rare. In this episode, we cover the lore of the Daughters of Khaine Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of screaming, steaming, and scheming. And then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about those weemen. Man,
That was a stretch.
you're not getting my best tonight,
Wow,
guys.
wow.
I apologize. But
I can't tell if it was supposed to be Scottish or is just supposed to rhyme.
It's like they're miniatures?
But that's as good as
They're weemen, man.
how are you tonight, fellow Liathanam? It's because we're all guys here. That's why. Don't take it personally.
Right.
How you guys doing?
Good. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, doing all right.
It's a warm day today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saturday was
Yeah.
very nice, but
And
yesterday
breezy.
threw me off. And very breezy. Almost got blown away.
I did have Brussels sprouts yesterday, so I apologize.
Apology accepted.
Is that like a Mother's Day tradition then, or what?
All right, so it sounds like everybody's doing just dandy. We've got a story phase. We've got a great story phase for you folks tonight. But before we do, I'd love to hear from my fellow co-hosts. I'd love to know what they've been up to in the hobby. And let's just go in the same order. Paul, what have you been doing in the hobby lately?
I have been working on a Tempest Eye, Path to Glory Order of Battle, using the Ashwaste Nomads and Caradron bits to make a Rusted Waste-centered scavenger Cities of Sigmar army. So I've been having a lot of fun with that.
Awesome.
That's a mouthful, but I love it. If listeners wanted to see pictures of this project that you're working on, where would they go to see pictures of this?
Well, they would definitely find the pictures on our Discord. That's www.themortalrealms.com/Discord.
Perfect. Nailed it. Got it in one. So, folks, if the description that Paul offered of his new project, it tickled your fancy, head on over to the Discord and come check it out. You'll have to go to the Hobby Time channel, but the pictures are there waiting for you.
They're pretty cool.
Yeah. Paul, anything else that you're working on?
Yes, Archaon.
Still?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's a big model.
I mean, all right. Now, I'm just going to say, Aaron, if I could say that with literally everything that you're working on.
I was just going to say, is he going to turn around on me? Fair play.
Statue.
I deserve that. Yeah. Touche indeed. All right, Josh, what are you working on in the hobby, or what have you been working on in the hobby?
I'm working on my Darko Savagers as part of the Circle of Paint Challenge for the Dogs of Warcry podcast. We're coming up on episode 8, so I'm running out of time. So I got almost all the base coats on, and then I'm actually going to try something out. I've been watching some painting tutorials and people using oils and oil washes to do shading and then some highlighting. So I'm actually going to use that as my next hobby development project. And so after I get the base coats on, I'll start working with some oil paints and see how it all turns out.
Very cool. Right on.
So getting the base coats on, is that 75%? Is that 50%? Because, I heard on the last show that you were supposed to be 75% done by the next show.
Well, that was Paven trying to push some sort of standard, so it don't come with the last minute win.
He's a pusher, that Paven. I've always said that about him.
It's a disgruntled podcast, man.
Hey, Will, what have you been up to in the hobby?
In between pretending I'm actually going to start painting my Ideneth Path to Glory roster, I've been kit bashing a bunch of Cruel Boy Oryx for the new Anvil of Apotheosis, just seeing the weird, wacky stuff I can come up with.
Right on. Do you got a favorite so far?
Yeah, so I took the limited edition Swamp Kala Shaman. I replaced his staff with a spear, and then I put him on a base with the crab as his minor companion. and I love him.
If anything ever happens to him, you'll kill all of us and then yourself.
Exactly.
Right on. Does he have a name yet?
He had a name. It is Beastfinder Grapsit.
Nice. I just off the cuff were coming up with this question, just hoping that you had answers, and lo and behold, you did. Good job. Bravo.
Of course. Why would I not name him?
Yeah, that's touche. Taken out of Haven's book, typically. All right, and then I coincidentally enough, I'm also assembling Dark Oath Savagers, taking a break from the Daughters, which is ridiculous because we're literally having a Daughters conversation right here, right now. But
Right here,
I wanted to finish up my Slaves to Darkness stuff that I had. So in doing those, in assembling those, I could check the slaves off the list. So
Nice.
I think I'm almost done. There's 10 of them, right? So like I'm probably on dude 7 or 8 at this point. So we're getting close.
Close.
Yeah, right on. And then I like how that I was trying to make it a point to like ask the Discord, like, hey, what's the right loadout for like each of these dudes? As if it made any difference whatsoever in my life, because Lord knows it does not.
I'm not going to get them on the table before anything else happens and the rules change and everything else. So
Yeah, true. It'll mess them all up. Ironically enough, that I already made that joke on the podcast I recorded earlier today. So now the question is, which episode am I going to have to edit it out from? So Lord knows I can't keep it in both.
Eeny, meeny, miny,
Yeah,
mo.
right. I reckon this one will probably go a little bit longer. It probably has a little bit more fat to trim, I'm sure. So, speaking of trimming the fat, hey, let's jump right into our story phase. If you guys got nothing else you want to chat about, so Paul, if you'd be so kind as to do the honors.
the story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms.
Guys, we made it. Here we are. Let's do this thing. All right. Daughters of Khaine. So this is a faction and army. It's been out for quite a bit, actually. I'm trying to take a look at, can I talk and look at my books at the same time? Let's see. Is this going to work?
Give you a 35% chance.
Make a roll.
I mean, they've been around the block for a bit. Marathi's been around. So we're finally getting around to covering them. What is this? Must be their like 3rd Battletome at this point. So we get there eventually, you guys. I mean, it just takes us a little bit.
I'm still Marathi from the block.
You know it. And so, I mean, we've talked about, they've been sort of ancillary to a lot of our conversations, especially with the recent Broken Realms Marathi book. And by recent, I mean literally a year ago. So I think folks through osmosis have picked up quite a bit about the Daughters of Khaine. But let's at least touch on a little bit, where they come from and a little bit of their history to catch folks up. So who may not know about the history of those daughters or, what they're all about. So let us start the way we always do by offering up a one-sentence explanation, our best one-sentence explanation to sum up the Daughters of Khaine. And it's not really a competition, but I love everyone trying to one-up each other. So if you folks would be willing to indulge me, and let's explore my favorite segment of the entire show. So it seems like some of you guys have already written down notes, which is it's literally the opposite of the spirit. Yeah, it's against the spirit of the game that we're trying to play here. So I don't want to be so cruel as to flat out delete your sentences, but I will look at your sentences, and if you read them word for word, you are disqualified and uninvited from the podcast for the rest of the night. So, which is actually going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And yet, so since Paul was willing to not bend the rules, he lives the spirit of the game that we're trying to play here. Paul, I'd love to hear your one sentence explanation of the Daughters of Khaine.
Let's go with blood swilling, mortal killing, hyper violent acrobats of Khaine, a dead god. Acrobats of a dead god. Let's go with that.
Nice, perfect. Can't be beat. What I did is actually I hid your guys' previous your entries. I won't delete them. That's mean. No, you bastard, Josh. I can see what you're doing right now.
There's a threat of power right now. Something's going on in this temple city.
Josh, it's your turn. Don't let me do it, Josh. Give me a one-sentence explanation of the Daughters of Khaine.
Definitely. We've got murderous elves of all sorts and varieties with a new upgraded goddess.
Okay, yeah, all right, very good. And you got the murder in there. I feel like that's important. Elves, obviously. All right, you touched on some great stuff there. Will, it's your turn. Show them how it's done.
I have to not follow the notes. All right.
I have no problem with that ever. I don't understand why people have a problem with following the notes.
The first victims of Marathi's lies, these elves follow the new god across the mortal realms.
Excellent. All right. And there was a little editorializing right there. I feel like I understand how you feel about Marathi and, who she is. Good job, guys. I feel like we've a job well done. We can close her up there. Now, I can't keep making that joke every time we do this. I need to stop with that one. All right. So those are the Daughters of Khaine in a nutshell. But let's look backwards. Let's introduce some hindsight a little bit here and talk about how they got here, how they arrived, what's a little bit of their origins. They share a lot of their history with some of the other factions that we've talked about sort of ad nauseum at this point. The Deepkin, the Lumineth, the Daughters now at this point. It's a lot of intertwined storylines between the elf gods, Slaanesh, elf souls, the world that was, et cetera, et cetera. Does anybody want to give me a quick summary as to where the Daughters of Khaine are coming from in the mortal realms?
Yeah, I can take it.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, this is their third battle tome, but this is the first battle tome I've actually read for the Daughters of Khaine. So some of this, I don't know if it's new or if it's new to me.
I'm in that boat too, right there with you.
Yeah. After, the world that was exploded, Slaanesh ate a bunch of elven souls, and as we all know, we have the four big elvish gods teamed up to sort of get those souls out of Slaanesh. But even though Marathi wasn't a god, they needed her advice because she's the only person they can think of who has escaped Slaanesh's belly on her own, crawled her way out. So while this is still connected to everyone, all the other elves of Sigmar, AOS, this specific story is a little bit different because it's not that she was a god. It's they picked her because she is a survivor and that she can get the job done. And so she took her pittance or her tax of elvish souls and created the Daughters of Khaine.
Yeah, couldn't ask for a better explanation. Though the one correction, it was Marathi doesn't crawl anywhere. She strides horizontally, perhaps, right? But
Slithers.
She's or slithers. I dare you to say that to her face. But she's never crawled a day in her life, even as a baby. Actually, can you imagine Marathi as a baby though? That's wild.
No.
It's only like 50,000 years ago. That's all.
But maybe more than that. I mean, it's hard to judge. Absolutely. She was all part of the whole the fishing expedition of souls out of Slaanesh's belly. She got some of the first ones, didn't she? Like, is that why she got like some of the weird stuff that popped out of Slaanesh's belly?
Well,
recall correctly.
So they actually explain it a little bit in the book, and this was something that I did not parse before or didn't realize.
I think they changed it.
Yes, it feels like it might have been a change, which is that the actual Daughters of Khaine, the witch elves and the Sisters of Slaughter, seem to be normal elves. I don't know if they started out as normal elves.
Weird definition of the word normal, but
but they seem like elves from the realms, I should say. Whereas the Scathborn, which is the Serpentine and the Winged Ones, when Marathi takes the souls from Slaanesh, she actually puts a drop of the blood from Khaine into the bowl where she creates them, and they become those mutants, as it were. So that's an intentional creation on her part, which I don't remember that necessarily being a thing.
Yeah, before they were the original, initial corrupted versions, kind of like they talked about with the Lumineth Realm Nords too. So, but now, they've changed it where she created them in the cauldron with Khaine's blood. Okay,
interesting. So I, like Will was saying before, I didn't read the previous battle tomes close enough to notice that it was a difference. But if it is in fact, then hey, the storyline evolves, or maybe it was just flat out a secret. I'm sure Marathi wasn't advertising the fact that she was creating these things, and it's probably also true that they were pretty warped and twisted in Slanesh's belly long before Morathi even got to him. So interesting, though.
Aaron, I got a word for this. Can I use
Tell
my
me.
word?
Yeah, okay, I know what it is.
Unreliable
Crazy.
narrator.
Can't rely on it.
Definitely an example of an unreliable narrator where we're getting one story from one book and another story from another, which is one of the things that I really enjoy, because now Morathi is an actual god. So, of course, her origin story has changed, right? If they came out of Slaanesh as they were, well, then they weren't created by Morathi. But if Morathi created them, right, then she has actual power over their creation.
Yeah, ownership over them in some way.
This Battletome in particular didn't read like a normal Battletome to me, because part of the way because it started, and part of the way because there's a lot of changes to what I understood to be the lore for this faction.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was actually very intentional to reflect the fact that Morathi Khaine is now the leader of the religion, as opposed to playing as the leader of a dead god's religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, as time goes on, as we go through the book, I'd love to hear other examples of things that you feel like have evolved or changed or what have you. So I feel like we got the origin pretty nailed down. And this is one of the few times we're like jumping into the origin and then the timeline after the fact seems to flow fairly naturally. I've always dreamed that it was going to work this way. And I think this might be the first time that it's actually working well. But so they've been created. This is deep in the Age of Myth, early days, but we still have a whole Age of Myth to go through. I would love to hear what your guys' impressions were before we get to the story specifically, but just generally, what did the Age of Myth mean for the Daughters of Khaine? Like, how did they live in that age? And then we can use sort of the stories to sort of back up or use that as evidence. But what were they doing generally around that time?
I think the first point I would make is that they weren't really a thing, because Morathi was just alone and had no worshippers because she wasn't a god. And so until we got this, partnership of Teclis and Tyrion and Malarian, she was just trying to find some way of gaining power. And so it very much read to me, at least to start with, as an origin story. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
And very mythological too, right? Like where it was a time where there was just gods, or, plural gods. And they were, living in these sort of prehistoric times a little bit before even the faction existed. No, that's true.
Yeah, that is interesting too, because they talk about her stealing Malarian shadow shifting magic and using the shadow paths to allow her sex to travel throughout the realms and establish new places, all secretly. So Malarian didn't really know what was going on and how she was expanding her power in the realm of Ulgu.
Yeah, and she was drawing sort of those, like we were saying before, the elves of the realm, like to her in Ulgu and elsewhere, and sort of serving as a figurehead, right, for that for the religion of following the bloody-handed god, of Khaine. And we can get into this now, I suppose, but tricking those elves to convince them that she had some sort of connection to Khaine beyond just this one singular artifact that she controlled, the Iron Heart of Khaine, where she was drawing some element of power from, but then using that as a status symbol to sort of convince them that she was maybe greater than she ended up being, and was sending them off on maybe crusades aren't the word, but missions or holy quests to go out and find additional artifacts from Khaine too, right? Like we've got this heart, but there's more out there. He's got fragments, and they need to be found. And if we can put them back together, essentially, maybe we'll be able to draw on more power. Very similar to the Fireslayer story in some sense, right? You've got the shattered god,
but they can actually do that. Morathi is totally.
Yeah, very, very different. But I wonder if she even got the idea from the Fireslayers, right? Like it's like they've got the right idea over there. I'm gonna borrow some of that. She's conniving.
She watches Grimnir explode and just starts taking down notes.
Mm-hmm. She's like, good idea. Don't want to explode though. I don't love that. Crosses that step off. Step 1, but step 2 through 10 makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any stories from this age that really jumped out at you that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I was gonna say I had one that I thought was fun, which is Savagery Excised, which is we have like Bone Splitter Oryx who, instead of like their traditional war paint, are painting themselves with actual shadows. And like looking at these stories, this looks like the first big like war that the Daughters of Khaine have that's not with each other. As Morathi's like cleaning house to create her cult. And it's just interesting that like you have this cult that is all about being fast, about being bloody, about being murderous, going up against almost ninja orcs. And then it ends with them assassinating this dude while he's out fishing. He's fishing giant sharks that live in shadow, but he's still fishing. I just feel like that's rude.
He died how he lived. Fishing.
I love that they had shadow painted, they were shadow painted, so like shadow tattoos and stuff. That's kind of cool.
That is cool. Right on. Anybody else have any stories from this time frame that they want to chat about?
They introduced a plot thread that I don't remember from the previous one either, in Ill-Fated Prophets.
Yes.
Talk about Mirai Heg, which is an old world elf god. But they've introduced this conflict now where there are Daughters of Khaine type elves that worship Mirai Heg, who is the goddess of prophecy, as opposed to Morathi. And they had basically infiltrated all of the temples, and everybody was totally cool with it until Morathi was like, oh, I don't like this. They're worshiping somebody else besides Khaine, aka me. And then went on and to just basically eradicate them from the face of the realms, but didn't quite succeed. So that's a plot thread that'll pick up later too, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was even more the fact that because some of these people actually had prophecies, and then they would start saying, we never prophesized the death of Khaine. So how do you know he's gone, and how do you usurped his power? We never prophesized his rebirth, so this is not happening. And so I think that was what was creating the conflict. She was like, oh, they're directly contradicting what I'm saying in my religion. They need to go.
This and then one of the other stories really drives home a point for me, which is I've always associated Daughters of Khaine with Morathi and her cults. But we're seeing that like this battle tome really is the battle tome for the elves and daughters themselves. Morathi is very important, but like we're seeing non-Morathi Daughters of Khaine start to sprout up a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it even mentions a few places where, if her followers had discovered her duplicity, they would be taking her out, So it kind of goes on to emphasize that she's created this entire world with a lie. And, it's really just her, and everybody else is kind of following along until they find out better.
Yeah.
It is really fascinating to me that in a world where the gods literally exist, we have a character who's not a god, who convinces an entire race that she is, right? Mm-hmm. Or speaks on behalf of a god and then becomes a god, right? Like,
yep.
So what it really kind of plays on is the idea that we don't really know what gods are in the Mortal Realms, which we kind of discussed when we were talking about Broken Realms, where Kragness is like, here's a god. Okay, but we don't know anything about him, and we need to learn about him, right? Whereas Morathi has just become a god, but we're taking the narrator's word for it, right? And it totally makes sense that she is, but then how do you combine two gods, and then the one god becomes two gods, and it makes it super complicated, but also super intriguing to me. Just the whole path.
It also acknowledges that you can totally fake it until you make it when it comes to godhood. Because it's all about belief.
Right.
In deification and in podcasting, fake it till you make it. I guess I don't even have I'm not even going to necessarily talk about any story elements of it, but it's in this time frame. Also, they introduced the Iron Shard. Is that the name of the town?
Yep.
Iron Shard, yep. And here it's a sort of a mountain, like isolated stronghold, but it's built on top of this umbrium mine. And so you hear umbrium, it sounds like some sort of rare material. You wonder, is that some sort of realm stone? No, not realm stone. Completely different magical material. Apparently, Olgu's got two of them. This one it's like a special magical metal that they can mine here at the Iron Shard.
What's made of it? Like the temple is made of it.
The temple's made of it too. That's even wilder. And because of it, it's just as valuable as this realm stone. And so they make apparently temples and weapons and things out of it. And this iron shard place comes up a few times in the book. So it's one of those, it may have been mentioned before, I don't know. But like the fact that they keep bringing it up makes me think that it's kind of important, right? Like it's almost spends as much time being discussed as like Hagnar, which is, the capital of Marathi's like strongholds and stuff. So like I just thought it was noteworthy that it's brought up here, but also multiple places later as well. So hey guys, keep your eyes open, or keep your eyes on Iron Shard and see what comes of it. There may be more than meets the eye.
More than meets the eye.
You know it. Is there any other Age of Myth stuff that folks want to talk about before we shift gears? We turn the clock forward.
I think we hit it all.
Tear off a page on our age calendar. All right. We transition to the age of chaos. What is, again, sort of speaking generally, what does the Age of Chaos look like for our Daughters of Khaine? I'll get us started. For example, Daughters of Khaine typically located in Olgu, by no means exclusively, but oftentimes they are. And one of the hallmarks of the Age of Chaos in Olgu is the invasion is not quite the word, though there are invaders, I suppose. But Slaanesh has the forces of Slaanesh have their eyes on Olgu because they believe that's where they're going to find Slaanesh, who's obviously been chained up in the hidden gloaming between Olgu and Hish. So they're running rampant across the realms. They're obviously butting heads up against the Daughters of Khaine. Fortunately, the daughters can use the shadows of Olgu to their advantage, and they can strike from the shadows and use it to obfuscate and hide and guerrilla tactics when fighting Slaanesh. But they do see a fair bit of that invasion there in the realm. Does anything else jump out at you guys about as far as the Age of Chaos is concerned for the Daughters of Khaine? Or if there's any stories, I suppose you can jump into your stories now too.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things, the preemptive measures section here talks about Marathi's fear that the followers of Slaanesh would discover the shadow paths and be able to use them to their own, benefit, and that she unleashes the Khainite shadow stalkers to kill any chaos warlords that get close to the portals and things like that. So it was interesting to me because I played the Khainite shadow stalkers for Warcry, and they're kind of retconned into this section in terms of, they weren't created, closer to the Broken Realms books. They were actually created much earlier now, and they've got marks of shadow, so they can do this bidding for her even during the Age of Chaos. So that was a nice little inclusion and kind of pulling up forward in the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where they're very secretive, right? They could have been used, this whole time and no one would know because they're,
exactly
stealthy assassins. I will call out the fact that actually they have a term for the Age of Chaos, they being the Daughters of Khaine, and they call it the Cathrar Duel because it wouldn't be an elf battletome unless they had fancy words for like, an age or something like that. What is the Lumineth?
Okari Dara.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly what it was. So that's the Spirefall. Does anybody have any other stories they want to talk about in the Age of Chaos?
I enjoyed the Bond of Blood, where Marathi and her son Malarion, who we haven't really talked about so far, but that's a bond from the old world that makes it into the mortal realms. And they meet each other and hate each other still because of everything that they hated about each other in the old world. So, Malarion's got mommy issues, and they continue on to the current day.
And he's a god, and she's not. And that was,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she's got son issues of like, dude, like, come on, help me out here. So they do find common cause to fight Be'lakor, but then they use their tense relationship as a way to actually win the battle because they both bring their separate armies to fight Be'lakor. And then Marathi is like, oh, actually, I'm not doing so great. I'm just going to run away. So then Be'lakor completely commits to Malarion. And then Marathi turns around and is like, oh, I was just joking. And then flanks Be'lakor. So it was fun.
This story also has a new noun alert. Because it's, we have a new noun. It's Malarion's Olgu Rothi.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I just did a Google search and it's like, do you mean algorithm? No.
I don't mean that, Google. Man, Google, you're so dumb. Come on, Google. Don't tell Google I said that.
It already heard you.
I was going to say, it's already aware. I wonder, like it's one of those. I wonder if they're dancing around like what term they actually want to use for like Malarion stuff, right? Like either that is the term, or they're just trying to get creative with like their terminology before they can actually announce what the name of whatever his army is going to be.
Well, we know his army is called the Umbraneth, I think.
That feels right, especially because it's got the eth suffix that all the other elves do. Yeah,
so they've said it before, but they've also said it in relation to the Khainite Shadow Stalkers, I think. Like it's, I don't
just shadow folk essentially. Yeah,
exactly. So, well, it calls into question whether or not the Shadow Stalkers are actually maybe something that Malarion uses as well.
I think somewhere in here or somewhere else, I did see that he does have Shadow Stalkers as well. But I don't know. Again, they're called Khainite Shadow Stalkers, and they're marked in a way that Morathi. They're completely loyal to Morathi, at least they're supposed to be. And but they do say that Malarion has Shadow Stalkers as well, and they both use them to travel through the Umbral Web because it does take its toll.
I don't know if they call what Malarion has. I don't know if he calls them Shadow Stalkers. I know that he has people who can walk through the Umbra Web. I don't know if they're also called Shadow Stalkers, though they might be. I guess I didn't catch it specifically. I just written down somewhere in my notes that he just had he had folks too that could do it. Like they both had their own crack team of sneaky
Assassins.
Dudes. Yeah, exactly. Yep. But I'm looking at someone had screenshotted an article from Warcom, it looks like, where they do use the word Umbraneth, I think, for the Shadow Stalkers as well. I always wondered why the Shadow Stalkers were with Morathi in the first place, and that like from a style perspective, there are some similarities, but they are pretty like markedly different from a lot of what the rest of the range kind of looks like. And so I know they always seem like they stood out to me, but I guess I just chalked it up to being a Warcry thing as opposed to them being completely different.
Well, she stole the shadow sorcery from Malarion. I mean, she's built upon it and expanded it, but I it does. She kind of took that information and used it for her own. So it makes sense that he would also have similar troops, and maybe more of his troops are bound to shadow than Morathi's.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah. Man, I flat out can't wait for that army to come out. Like, it's not even. I mean, whether or not I collect them is not beyond the point. I just want to see what they look like.
As long as they come in a battle box, you'll collect them.
Yeah, well,
yeah. While it's not a specific story, there's like a different part of the book that I wanted to mention, just since we're in the Age of Chaos, which almost convinced me that I might like Morathi, which is that followers of Morathi would talk to like Sigmarites and go like, well, yeah, sure, she kills people, but she didn't run away in the Age of Chaos and shut the door behind her. She was here with us. I'm like, you know what? Actually,
got him.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense. I love it to hear all the different races like perspectives on like what Sigmar did, right? Like oftentimes you get it from this, the Stormcast perspective, or like the Cities of Sigmar perspective. Well, even in the Cities of Sigmar perspective, you get some people who aren't super stoked on Sigmar. But like, what do the daughters? What's their take on it, or the dwarves, or what have you? So chalk it up to less impressed for the Daughters of Khaine.
Again, different part of the book, but I think it's one thing that I'm really picking up on is like the cult of Khaine and Morathi extends beyond just these elves, and it's that kind of like propaganda that we might talk about later that is crucial to it, of like luring people in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Sigmar, though, might we transition then to the Age of Sigmar? Unless you guys have any objections. But if we hop into the Age of Sigmar, at least in the early days of the Age of Sigmar, what did that look like then for the Daughters of Khaine? How did their lives change? How did they stay the same? What were they up to in the early days of AOS? What do you guys think?
They were like solid allies because it kind of says that Morathi's like, yeah, I know I'm going to do something really stupid later on in the Age of Sigmar. So I'm going to start out being like super cool and like doing everything you say, because I'm going to take one of your cities, because I'm going to become a god, and like I've just decided that that's going to happen. So like the beginning of Age of Sigmar, she is just like, yep, I'll do this, yep, I'll do that, where do you need me now? Like the best administrative assistant everywhere for Sigmar.
And then as soon as she moves through an area, Sigmar turns around and then looks back, and there's just a bunch of temples and gladiator arenas that she has set up.
Which all feed her power.
Yeah, she's just giving the people what they want, though. People are eating it up.
Yeah.
They're all about it. How could she say no? So to your point, wherever a city of Sigmar sprouts up, so too do they introduce gladiatorial pits or arenas that the daughters seem to populate and entertain through their ritualistic blood sports. It's very ancient Roman. People are just eating it up. They're digging the violence, and little do they know that they're witnessing these very ritualistic and they're growing the power of the Daughters of Khaine through this combat. But they just think that they're having a good time, which is pretty messed up in some ways, right? Come on, guys, you're better than this. Order, it's in your name. Where's the order in this?
It's very ordered, very strategic.
Or like they're gonna order some dude's death. That's for sure. They're gonna order some sacrifices. Check this out. Did anybody have any stories from this time, from the early days, that they wanted to chat about?
I enjoyed the story, The Fungal Lunatics.
No way.
I know,
You?
right? It's about Gloomspite Gitz. Who knew? But it is a Gloomspite Gitz tribe in Olgu, and I just love the name of the main guy, the general of the army, is a Knitbug Dribblesnot. And he just rides around on like a massive mushroom. And he has just a bunch of like fanatics around him at all times. And so he just causes basically a bunch of headaches until one of the Skaithborn is just like, I'm done with this, and then turns him into crystal. So somewhere in Olgu, there is a crystallized Gloomspite Gitz, general on a crystallized mushroom, which just sounds amazing and ridiculous at the same time.
Yep.
And Paul will have him. Rest assured.
Make the model, I'll have him, or I'll convert him, whatever, it'll be fine.
He will be his. Oh yes, he will be his. Very, very cool and mushroomy. All right, so they don't spend too much time in the early days of Aegis of Empire. In fact, they don't spend too much time in the time of tribulations and soul wars, really, either in these timelines. I think we can recall the fact that I believe Marathi had got a sense that Nagash was up to no good, and it was in some part due to her urgings and advice that the forces of order even set out to go and stop Nagash. I mean, there were some premonitions from the Lord Ordinators on the Stormcast side of things, but she was right there with her forces to also ride out and try and prevent Nagash's big Necroquake plan. Though it's worth noting that she didn't necessarily send her best and brightest, but rather she sent folks that she was trying to get rid of.
Expendable.
To fight alongside those preventing the Necroquake, or trying to prevent the Necroquake. So she was involved there too. Again, she's been around. She's been an ally. She's been in the mix this whole time. Any other time of tribulation, Soul Wars era type points that folks want to bring up? Because if you don't, I'm going to bring up mine, which is there was a duel to the death story. And I bring it up because it highlights one of the new units in this book here with the High Gladiatrixes, I think is how you would say the plural of that. So there's the city Draichi Ganeth, which we might talk about a little bit later. It's this Tower of Blades, but it's known for having a lot of arena fighters. Like it's this tall tower, and there's a bunch of different floors with full of different types of fights in different environments. Anyways, a Vamp Lord rolls up. And he says, "Hey, look, I'm undefeated, and I'm looking for a duel. We're going to besiege this town unless you send somebody out here to duel me, because I can't lose. I'm on a hot streak. What do you got for me?" And so what they do is they send out Lotta Shadow Drake, which to sum it up is basically the best high gladiatrix in this here tower town. And so she rolls up. It takes her 7 strikes to get through his defenses, and 1 strike to take his head off. So she essentially drops a combo breaker on him, and he unlives no more at this point. So just goes to prove how
He undied.
cool she is. Yeah, he undied. Which, I mean, up against a vampire, that's not nothing. I mean, I know she's an elf. I guess I don't know where vampires and elves fall in the power rankings, but still impressive nonetheless. So good job, Shadow Drake. All right. The real meat, the real bulk of this history or timeline is the stories that we find in the Broken Realms / Age of Beasts era. A lot of time is spent recapping what has happened throughout Broken Realms Morathi and sort of the fallout of that. I know there's been some questions and things that folks have asked about this, so I think we'll probably spend a fair bit of time here. Where do we want to start? Because essentially the stories start right with her ascension. Does anybody want to talk about what that looked like?
Well, I'd actually like to talk about the actual book itself quickly before we actually dive into the story.
Tell me.
And by what I mean is that this is the first battle tome that I think I've ever read where they devoted like multiple pages towards a city that has nothing to do with the rules for the Daughters of Khaine. What I mean by that is that Har-Kiron is like the first thing in the book, and they go into a deep dive not only of like what happened with Broken Realms, but also like what Har-Kiron is right now. Like they went full on into what is it like to live in Har-Kiron right now? What are the repercussions of what's going on? And typically at the beginning of a battle tome, it's like, where did this race come from? Where do they originate from? What are they doing now? And so this was a complete departure for me from what I expected when I started to read the book. So I was very happily surprised to see. I thought we were going to get like, 1 or 2 paragraphs on what has happened to the Daughters of Khaine since the events of the Broken Realms. And we got pages and pages on it. So that was super fun and awesome.
Right on, very cool.
Yeah, all sorts of interesting story progression regarding Har-Kiron too that we can touch on later, I'm sure. But
yeah, absolutely. We'll go through the timeline. We'll just cover the Ascension of Morathi. Though, honestly, listeners, if you want to hear more about that, you know what you got to do. You got to go check out our episode on Broken Realms Morathi. But highlights. Morathi has an alliance with Sigmar. They go digging into the 8 points, and she betrays Sigmar because she actually wanted to mine up some Varanite. She takes that Varanite, she brings it back home, and she concocts this fancy spell using the Varanite, and then also has stolen a fancy lantern from the Deepkin, so that she can use the Varanite to sort of transform herself and develop a blood portal into Slaanesh so she can steal a whole bunch of souls from inside his belly, some ancient, particularly powerful souls from inside.
Things.
Yeah, exactly. Absorb them and then use their power to pop out a goddess. You would think that is a complicated enough plan that there's plenty of opportunity for it to fail. But guess what? Doesn't. Well, it doesn't essentially fail. She does pop out as a goddess, or rather two equal parts of a goddess. Her form splits between her beautiful elven form and that big old snake winged demon thing that she sometimes used to transform into. Now they're separate, but not separate entities. But that's good enough for her. She's got the powers of a goddess, and she essentially got what she always wanted. Good job, Morathi.
You did it.
You did do it. Meanwhile, in the process, she also massively betrayed specifically the Stormcast by sending her fighters to go poison them so they couldn't even go back to Azir and let Sigmar know what's going on, and then abandon them in the 8 points, and their souls were sullied by chaos. So, like, she not only betrayed, but, like, literally gut punched a bunch of chambers of Stormcast. It was just like, I don't want you to exist anymore, so I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you just go away.
You can't make a Stormcast, you can't make a goddess omelet without breaking a few Stormcast eggs, Paul. You, of all people, should know that.
I didn't go to culinary school, so I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, Morathi's putting on a cooking class then. So there's that.
A little blood of Khaine for you, and a little blood of Khaine for me.
So she becomes a goddess, and then it's from there where I think you guys were talking about some things or hinting at some things that you want to talk about, because now that she's a goddess, she wants to flex her goddess muscles, see what she's capable of, right? And she's got her sights set on the city, the free city of Ambelgard, which, as time goes on, we're not going to be using the term Ambelgard for much longer anymore. So this is where we focus in on the story of Har-Kiron. I suppose I'll bring up the question now. I don't know where the natural place is for it to jump in, so the beginning is a great place for it. So Darth Alec asks, he wants to know, how's the Anvilgard Har-Kiron affair covered? So let's start there. Who wants to sum? And again, we sort of talked about it in Morathi, but who wants to sum up what has at least happened historically with Anvilgard there?
I'll take a shot at it if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
You got an army from there, so yeah.
Actually, I do have an army from there. Apparently, I made a really good choice. The black scale coil is a thing that we've been hearing about in Anvilgard for a while. So Anvilgard was basically kind of the shady city of Sigmar, where there was a high council and an arbiter and all that kind of thing. But a lot of the strings were being pulled by a lot of shady characters. Get it? Shady characters.
Get out of here.
I don't get it.
You're fired from the podcast.
Who were being led by a character called the Sovereign, and they were named the Black Scale Coil. So this was super fun for me because usually we get a lot of these little hints of like, hey, this thing exists. Do whatever you want to with it. And that's all we ever hear about it, right? Like, there's a thing called the Black Scale Coil. It can be whatever you want to. And I remember when they first talked about it, there was a lot of discussion about who this was. Like, could it have been Marathi, or it could have been Be'lakor? It could have been any number of characters, right? But what Broken Realms is it said, oh yeah, no, this was Marathi, and this has been a long-term plan. She knew that she was going to try to become a god, and so she pulled this whole shenanigans where she betrayed everybody, and then she kind of just conquered Amelgard as like a graduation present from mortality to herself. And so she was just like, I'm a god now, so I'm just going to like take a city because that's what a god would do. And yeah, I know Sigmar's going to be mad at me, but I don't care. Like, I'm a god now, so I'm going to do what I want. And so the Black Scale Coil has an uprising, and they functionally just kick everybody out of the city that has any kind of resistance whatsoever to her rule, and kill everybody else who actually takes up armed resistance. And one Stormcast escapes, and then we have this, which seems new to me, we have this actually large-scale battle that happens right after Harkiron is taken, where the Stormcast come to take it back, which is then interrupted when the microphone comes down, the microphone being the Celestant Prime, and is like, hey guys, we all need to stop killing right now. And then Marathi and the Celestant Prime go parley for a while, and Marathi comes out and is like, all right, Celestant Prime says you gotta stop killing me now. And Celestant Prime's like, okay, guys, you gotta stop killing right now because we need Marathi over here in Excelsis, because Excelsis is a much bigger fish than Anvilgard, and we need her help. So they make a point of saying that that's not everything that's going to happen, and she just doesn't get to keep Harkiron, but there is an impending threat that something
for now.
Yeah, exactly. It's a for now, you can have this city and turn it into a temple city with a murder pit of death. Just like, don't kill any more people, please. Like, don't kill any of the mortals, please.
Well, when she took the city, though, she did turn over thousands of lives to the Ideneth as a reward for their ally. So
yeah,
thousands.
No one had any issue with that.
Yeah, yeah. Just had a little bit of appeasement going on, and it's totally fine. It'll all work out great.
Did.
Yeah, but who cares what Nagash thinks? His butt got beat. Like he's nobody now. Nagash.
He had to send the librarian because he didn't know what to do.
I know. I'll send my book nerd. Yeah. So
it's like sending one of us to go fight a battle.
Yeah.
Just like one of the lore guys. It'll be fine. They'll figure it out.
Anything else to add about the taking of Harkiron?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's interesting is the Lord Veritant Kaiser von Brecht is the one who did the investigating and got captured. He was actually released by some shadowy entity, and I can't recall if it was deduced to be Be'lakor or if it was some people thought it was Malarian.
It was Be'lakor, actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But so he didn't escape; he was freed, because somebody wanted the information to get out to Sigmar to kind of continue the strafe.
If we actually kind of parlay that information into what we know happened in Broken Realms, it seems like Be'lakor freed Van Brecht in order to take the Stormcast away from Vindicarum.
Yep.
Right? So he could try and take Vindicarum more easily. So he wanted to make sure that Sigmar knew that something happened here, so he would redirect his forces there.
Exactly.
Schemes within plans within plots.
Yep.
Darth Alec had more questions about Harkyon. He did ask why Anvilgard, and I don't know the answer to that question. Why did Marathi go after Anvilgard specifically in the first place?
It does talk about that in the book. I think in the bigger section earlier on, it just talks about how it's in a strategic place on the coast, in another realm outside of Ulgu, and then also because it had such a large population of elves to begin with.
Oh, okay, right on. That's pretty simple.
And because the council itself was super weak, so she was able to exercise a ton of power.
She was probably hoping to do like more than one, but they're the only ones that fell for it.
Suckers, every last one of them. And then I suppose we could talk now about it, but do they go into any of the Anvilgard loyalists that are keeping up the fight, or any other folks who have a objection to the current state of Harkyon? I leave that open ended, and you guys can talk about whatever you want.
They do.
They do.
It's actually interesting because I think it's one of those ongoing narratives. Like, okay, well, yes, she has it, but there are people fighting a rebellion within the city. But there are also all the Anvils of Heldenhammer, who are the Stormcast chamber in the city. Those that were captured and studied by Marathi were released, and they form a warrior cult called the Selumnites, and vow not to take on any honors or accolades until they recapture the city. So now you have this like subsection of this Stormcast chamber that has its own goals. So it's kind of interesting because, even if you kind of draw parallels to the 40K universe during the Horus Heresy, they form these warrior cults that eventually turn to chaos. And you're like, these guys are forming warrior cults. Are they going to deviate from Sigmar? Are they going to fall to, temptation? I'm kind of interested to see where that goes.
I feel like I made a Draconith conversion of this specific story before I even knew it was a story. So I'm super excited about this. They also paint the Anvilgard symbol onto their breastplates too. So we have some actual like intentional deviation from the chamber colors, which is kind of cool.
I do like they keep the naming convention because it's not like old Anvilgard, it's Anvilgard that was. Just like the world that was.
Right.
So they're also, if you want to know more about this, they actually talk a little bit about the guerrilla warfare in the Arena of Shades book as well. They talk a little bit more about it. It's not a ton, but it's something. So they talk about how there are active elements of resistance, and Kaiser von Brecht, I think, was specifically mentioned as somebody who was intentionally going back into the city in order to work on overthrowing Marathi.
I like all these folks who are sort of disregarding the treaty or like, the peace. They're like, I don't think so, gods. We're going to take matters into our own hands, which is, it's that fighting spirit that you see in the Age of Sigmar.
And that it's not just like mortals, that it is Stormcast who are made by Sigmar who are like, but like, do we need to listen to what you say though?
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm going
temporary.
Sigmar, I'm going through a tunnel. I can't hear you. Going up an elevator. Tunnel into Anvilgard is where this tunnel's going. So we talked about how essentially a peace is brokered between the Celestin Prime with Marathi, because obviously there's bigger fish to fry, and that is the battle at Excelsis. Tyromancer, patron of the show, had asked, does Excelsis pop up in the story since Marathi was there during Kragnos? They have a little blurb here in the timeline talking about, a little bit of the battle for Excelsis. Obviously, Marathi is convinced to aid the siege there, so they come in through ships, right? There's a bunch of like orcs who had attacked from the port side. There's a few mega gargants, but then they see off in the distance there's the Black Ark Corsairs who had sort of abandoned the city for a while because the elves were being persecuted for a stretch. They come returning back with Marathi at their helm, maybe not literally, but to storm the beaches and relieve the defenders of Excelsis, and Morathi herself and the Shadow Queen goes toe-to-toe with Kragnos for a little bit, but from a brawling standpoint, Kragnos gets the upper hand, upper fist, upper mace, upper hoof, I don't exactly know, over Morathi's snake coils, and like bashes her off into a wall or something. And that is maybe not a physical wound, but a psychological wound that the Shadow Queen doesn't quickly recover from, and we can talk more about that a little later. But
just a quick point there. Did you point out that the Shadow Queen is not Morathi Khaine? Have we actually covered that bit yet?
A little bit, but we didn't go into a lot of detail.
Yeah, when she became the goddess, her psyche split. We'll do a deep dive in Morathi a little bit later to highlight that.
But it's super important that specifically the Shadow Queen was the one who got hurt.
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
So, but then as we know, again, if you want to hear more about this, obviously listen to our Broken Realms Kragnos episode. Kragnos is tricked through a combination of Morathi's misleading spells and a portal created by Lord Croak, and he's whisked off to parts unknown. Well, actually, no, I think we do know where he got whisked off to. Thus sort of ending that Excelsis siege, and Morathi has held up her end of the bargain.
Will has something just a little bit before Excelsis here.
Yeah.
Oh, fine.
We're turning back time. I just wanted to call out.
Turn back time.
I just want to call out one of the stories, "Cruel Hearts." I mostly want to call out because it takes place before the Battle of Excelsis, before Kragnos comes, and like we see the Cruel Boys arrive en masse. We already have Cruel Boys invading Olgu. And it doesn't outright state it, but I would assume they're almost drawn by the fact that Morathi has ascended to godhood. Because she ascends to godhood, then Cruel Boys show up in Olgu, then Kragnos returns as a god, and Cruel Boys show up in Gur. So we're seeing that like these, the Isleta tribe showing up as a response to divinity.
Or power growth or whatever. Yeah, whatever's pushing them. Mm-hmm.
Sensing a trend. Interesting. But that's it. No more new gods. That's it. Two is enough, you guys. That's
for now.
Sufficient. Yeah. No,
not in this book.
No, for it. So we go from the Siege of Excelsis. It's the epilogue or outro of that Kragnos book is that it seems as if Morathi is going to be held accountable for her crimes. She's brought in front of some sort of tribunal or some council that's going to judge her, including the Celestian Prime, but who should come and step in and speak towards, I guess, clemency on behalf of Morathi, highlighting the fact that maybe there's bigger fish to fry, there's larger issues at hand, but Grugni himself, the god of metal, I guess,
the great maker.
The Smith god,
who has been, they say, absent for a long time, and I feel like at one point I've talked about it on a different episode that never really felt like he was absent to me, but that's neither here nor there. He steps in and says, no, now is not the time for this. By God decree, I think she's fine. She's totally cool. Let her be. And she walks away, I guess unchallenged or unpunished, some might say.
Yep, unpunished.
So I guess to that end, there's a couple folks who are asking questions about this. Darth Alec had asked, has there been any development on Morathi's punishment? Did you guys find any development on any possible ramifications to her actions?
Nope.
Well, I think the point that they were like, hey, there actually is going to be a consequence. We're going to let you have Harkiran for now is actually a development. I don't believe that was specifically stated before.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I have a question for you, Aaron.
Lay it on me.
We have all these questions. How do people get questions on this show?
God, I thought you would never ask. Let me tell you right now, the most important question is that very question. And fortunately, thank goodness I'm here because I have the answer for you. And it goes a little something like this. Hey, dear listeners, if you want to ask a question for this show that you're listening to right now, and thanks for doing so, by the way, I really appreciate it. If you want to ask a question and have us answer it in the most intelligent and thorough and thought-provoking way possible, I encourage you to hang out at our Discord server, which Paul had called out earlier in this episode, which can be found at www.themortalrealms.com/discord. And I need you, it's very important, listen closely, you need to hang out in that Discord just all day, every day. Don't ever leave. your children, not important. Your job, unnecessary. Hanging out in the Discord is what you want to be doing. And on a random day, with no warning whatsoever, I will ask, hey, listeners, we're going to record an episode. I would love if you have any questions about X, Y, or Z. And then there is your chance, the moment that you've been waiting for, lay them on me. And I will copy and paste some of them into this document that I'm reading off of right now, and we'll read them on the show.
It'll be wonderful and glorious in both things.
All right. So with that being said, let's ask some more questions. Kiraban was asking, has she in fact received redemption from Sigmar? And what's the current state of affairs between the Daughters of Khaine and the Sigmar nation? Would you say redemption was in order? Has she been redeemed at all?
I got this one. No.
Nice. Lob that one too. Although she hasn't been particularly punished per se, she also has not been redeemed. We're kind of in that middle ground where everyone's like, I don't know what to do, but I'm not in charge. I can't enforce anything. There's one guy who really can do anything about it. That's Sigmar. And he seems content to just let her, I don't know, spin in the wind, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that. It's more Grudney kind of coming forward and saying, hey, yeah, cities and stuff, that's all good, but it's more the fate of the realms is more important. We need to put this aside for now.
Do you think Sigmar gets 2 S words on what Grudney thinks about stuff? I mean, maybe he does.
Well, he's helped them, he's helped them build the Stormcast, right?
I suppose you can't piss that guy off, right? Like you kind of
right.
Well, and he immediately gave him a bunch of new armor and stuff. So he's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, fine.
That's probably true, right? Hey, Sigmar, to cool you down, check out this sweet new armor. And Sigmar's like, ooh, shiny. Let me see some of that. He's like, did you make a set for me? And Grugmy's like, I did, my man. And okay, I get it now, and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Kiraban has also asked if they talk about any interactions between Marathi and any Dwarven gods. I suppose I could have asked that earlier because, yes, that is this interaction, right, of Grugny stepping in. And
But it's fun how they describe it. Marathi Khaine is content to be patronized by such talk for the time being, but Grudney's arrival brings her much-needed reprieve. So she's still condescending, but she's like, I don't have to deal with this now.
Well, and one of the other things that is kind of a theme in this book as well is that Marathi is very much a new god. And so as opposed to most of the other ones that we've read where they've been gods for forever and they kind of know how everything works, Marathi really seems to be like figuring out what it means to be a god and like how she fits into the realms. And so a lot of it sounded a little bit like, all right, so I have my stuff in Ogu, but I only have that because my son gave it to me and I hope I don't make him too angry. And I have this city now in Akshi, but like I really got to make sure that I'm paying attention so I don't make Sigmar too angry. But also, I'm only a god and I only have a religion because of all these people that I tricked into thinking that I'm the servant of Khaine, and now that I am Khaine reborn. So I got to be really careful about them doing anything. So like, there's not a lot of firm ground for her to stand on so far that we know of.
it's a good thing she's got wings.
Yeah, she's kind of like teetering from disaster to disaster.
And she literally just got done fighting one of the oldest gods in Kragnos, so she can take a break.
Right. Yeah. No, she definitely, I think she likes it like this, though. She likes these layers upon layers upon layers of intrigue and stuff. But at times, I think you're right. It feels like she's like, oh, okay, maybe that was too much, or this is not right. Yeah. Or she's, like you said, kind of feeling things out.
Well, and kind of to hammer that point home is the last story they have in like the now, as it were. And this is where the Shadow Queen and Marathi Khaine are like totally cool, all hanging out, doing fine, right? And then all of a sudden, the Shadow Queen just takes off. And so one half of Marathi has just left to go to Gur because she's like, Kragnos, I need to deal with Kragnos. And then Marathi Khaine is like, crap, there goes half my soul. I guess I better follow. Right? Like, and not only does she have all of these external things that are fighting, now we have these internal, like between Marathi herself, she can't decide what's supposed to be happening right now. And they even heavily imply that the Shadow Queen has actually been making her own army. that Marathi Khaine wasn't all that aware of or didn't know was happening.
And here it even says it seems to be developing its own free will,
Yeah.
But then the Melusai, the blood-racked Melusai, is made with the Shadow Queen. And like you said, it indicates in other areas where she's continuing to make more and more, of her own volition and seems to be making an army.
So very much, it's whenever Shadow Queen goes running off, it conjures the image of Kel whenever Keenan is up to his antics. Here we go again.
That was exactly what I pictured in my head when I was talking about the Shadow Queen and Marathi Khaine.
I could tell. I knew it.
One other thing I think is interesting is because that is the last story of this little timeline. Mm-hmm. So we have an army that is almost majority focused in the realm of Ulgu, where she's all about having an iron or a bloody-handed grip over everyone in there. And the book ends with her going somewhere else, going to Gur. So now I'm really interested in finding out if anything happens to the kingdom she's leaving behind while she goes to find her other self.
Especially if there's, cracks in the facade a little bit, right? If there's the inkling of dissent, who's to say?
Oh, yeah, and there are.
Oh, and there is. But hey, tell you what, that's what I don't know. Well, if you did this on purpose, but what a great segue into. Hey guys, how's this faction organized? How do they live? What is their home life like? And the book dabbles in a few things that I think are worth calling out. One being this is relatively uncommon, but they call out a couple of the strongholds that the Daughters of Khaine hold. And in fact, Kiribon had asked any major strongholds for the daughters outside of Ulgu or what was once Anvilgard. And I think the ones they list here actually might have all been in Ulgu, but now is as good a time as any to talk about them. Did any of the three grab you guys in terms of interest or delight?
Yeah, they. You're right. Apparently, they have lots of temples throughout the realms, but all the main sects are in temple cities are in Ulgu. They do mention a few specifically. The one that caught my interest was the Kelebron, and they focus on Khaine's aspect as assassins or the unseen killer, and they tend to be nomadic and travel around, from sect to sect. And it mentions a few places that Marathi is beginning to be suspicious of them because they tend to have members of the Kelebron who worship Morag Keg, the goddess, the crone goddess of death and fate, that they can prophesize. And so there's this indication that this could be a faction that she's going to pursue heavily, or there might be rebellion coming within this faction or dissidents, spreading from this faction. So that'd definitely be interesting to see how that happens. And since it's nomadic, it kind of moves around, so it's hard to pin down, but it could also be spreading its influence.
Yeah, real suspicious. Got to stamp that out where you can. Did anybody else have any other of the strongholds or cities that they want to talk about, or those sub-factions that we have listed out here as well?
Kind of want to talk about Hagnar, city of the First Temple, sort of like her capital city, in the sense that this is where she's doing the most work and straight up replacing Khaine and all the imagery. And it's where, if you want to be a daughter of Khaine and you want to rise up the ranks, this is where you go. Because how the faction is organized is based on Marathi's whims. It just says, even if there are two people of different ranks in society, if she likes one more than the other, she'll just switch them. And so being close to her is the best way to move up in the world. But then elsewhere, everyone still has these old statues of Khaine as he once was. So we're seeing that there's a split in Daughters of Khaine society based on where her attention is.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, that is their, every faction has their Hammers of Sigmar faction. And so that is her main, sort of your generic Daughters of Khaine, because it is, hailing from her capital city. So you got to have one. Everybody's got one. Paul, did you have a favorite stronghold and or, sub-faction that you wanted to chat about?
we kind of already talked about the Iron Shard and the Umbral Edifice, which is this temple city that's built on top of a mountain. And there's a pretty cool picture actually on the map. So they have this metal that's not realm stone, but it has a lot of really cool properties to it. And they make all of the knives that the Daughters of Khaine use, and they have a specific name for it, and I am blanking on that name right now.
The Kuroth blades.
They have a specific way of making those blades specifically for Iron Shard, and it is a well-kept secret, and nobody else knows how to do them. And they actually are able to have some magical properties that really mess with everybody that they're fighting. So that was
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking up because I was looking at the list of the strongholds and the list of the subfactions, and it didn't occur to me that the Draichi Ganeth is both the name of the Tower of Blades, I think, and also the subfaction. I didn't put two and two together, but apparently it's both.
Executioner's Tower.
Okay, nice. And so I'll just a quick blurb about that. I mentioned it before, but there's this Tower of Blades, and think of it as, I don't know. I know there's a movie that's like this where like each level of the tower is its own arena, and each arena has its own like hallmark, I don't know, environment or specific, I don't know, threat that you have to deal with. Like one of them is like this, like in this tower, one of these arenas is like an inside lake, indoor lake, I guess is what you'd say, full of like sea creatures and islands that you have to jump around from. And there's, there's other ones which all different environments and different, battlefields that folks need to fight on, but it's all in this, multi-tower or multi-floored tower. And it's where it's literally the name of the tower that I just said, the Draichi Ganeth. So that subfaction is the arena fighters. And so we've talked a little bit about how the Daughters of Khaine, they sort of integrate into society through these gladiatorial fights and these arenas that sort of spring up in the different cities of Sigmar. And so this subfaction is all about that. Like that's their bread and butter, is these arena fights, because they think that they're worshiping Khaine through this, bloody combat. And so it's where you get a lot of your witch elves and your sisters of slaughter, and specifically the high gladiatrixes, which I had mentioned before in that story that we're talking about. So they, will hail from this tower, though I imagine they're sort of permeating throughout all the cities of Sigmar, as well as they're spending a lot of time in those arenas. So very cool.
Well, and I think we actually, this is a little bit on the side, but there was a Black Library novel where we were actually in one of those arenas that was slowly filling up with water. I feel like it was like Silver Shard or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. Yep. I mean, very arena-esque, right? Like it was meant to be like a Coliseum type. There was an audience up on these, rafters, and
stepping stones, and there were animals swimming that they had to kill. Yeah, so
very similar. Cool. So we talked a little bit about like where they live and what their factions are, and I guess the other thing I would have talked about would have been where does their authority come from? But Will had mentioned it before that, it's really whatever Morathi wants is what Morathi gets, right? And everyone's just jockeying for position and trying to please her so that they can, ascend the ranks of the org chart that is the Daughters of Khaine.
And I think just as a addendum to this, one thing they make a distinction of in the book is that the Scathborn are 100% loyal to Morathi, like where the normal witch elves can think for themselves and come to their own conclusions. It reiterates the Scathborn are 100% loyal, so they're part of her inner circle. They're the elite fighters, and they also go out and eliminate threats, and can disguise themselves and move through the crowds and look for threats. But so it's like her secret police. And now that she's become a goddess, she's letting them be seen more and more outside of the cities by other organizations. So,
right on. So, does anybody else have any thoughts about how they work at home? Internally, any other things to add there? Because then I'm going to ask, what do they do outwardly? At home versus abroad. How do they interact with the world? I think one way we can maybe highlight that, if there's an answer to this question, is a question posed by Ikarion from our Discord, and they ask, "What is the Daughters of Khaine agenda now that Morathi completed her godhood mission and managed to get redemption from Sigmar, though that's a point of contention. I don't know if she actually got redeemed, but like, what are they doing right now? I don't know if the book touches on it, or what did you guys think about, what their agenda is currently?
Can I just point out Arena of Shades here?
Please do.
Yeah.
This they don't talk about it much, if at all, in the Battletome. And that just got released. And so Arena of Shades is the box set that was released with the Night Haunt versus the Daughters of Khaine. But it also has a decent amount of lore about why those two are fighting together. And so to me, that's what's happening now. Is that Nagash has taken umbrage at the fact that Marathi just like gave away a bunch of souls from Anvilgard to the Ideneth in recompense for their cooperation in taking Harkiron and defending Harkiron from the Stormcast brotherhoods that were attempting to take it back. So that I highly recommend reading it. It's super fun. A lot of little stories and a lot of kind of big stories to tie in together. And what's motivating them there is I think Marathi is trying to consolidate what she has at this point. And it also, I think at one point mentions that they're not doing Dawnbringer Crusades because she's not Sigmarite, but they are sending out different groups of people to start new settlements anyway, because they want to really make sure that they have defenses and they have awareness of what's going on around them on the Charwan coast. So
I think her main goal, or at least it always has been, is spreading their influence through temples and arenas, and that's where they get worshippers. And she draws blood from all the different cauldrons of blood into the mother cauldron, at least she used to, and that's where she got a large portion of her power, is from all this blood sacrifice, really.
Yeah, and as far as like dealing with people outwardly, I'd mentioned like she's using the gladiator arenas to like bring people into the cult. And something Arena of Shades points out is that is happening fairly successfully in Harkiron itself. You think there's a city of people that she has conquered, that she, slaughtered a bunch of and only stopped because Sigmar kind of told her to. And they're kind of starting to turn towards her because she's putting on such a spectacle and showing how powerful her forces really are. And that's just being replicated across pretty much all of the free cities.
Yeah, like what does a god want beyond, more followers or more support? She like quickly is becoming, I think, one of the most like worshipped gods out there through this, and through the ritualistic combat and like the spectators of that she's growing quickly because of that that influx of followers that way. Didn't somewhere in the book didn't it say there's even something a little unnatural about these arena fights and how they're converting the people, right? Like they're getting like they're being driven, the audience is being driven to a frenzy by witnessing these sort of ritualistic combats in sort of a more otherworldly way, and they're not necessarily being like hypnotized or anything like that, but like it's affecting who they are as people, and it's making them fall to the sway of Marathi in the same way that kind of a chaos god like attracts its followers in some ways.
And I think it even specifically says that's like the VIP show.
Yeah.
Where if you have any sort of ranking in society, you get invited to like the after show and you get to see like the true ritualistic combat,
the real stuff, the pay-per-view stuff. So yeah, exactly. That's definitely wild. And so it seems as if that was always the case even before she ascended, but like it's especially the case now these days. A question I always like to ask is I always want to see if we can pinpoint who we think their allies are and who we think their enemies are. So let's start with their allies. Does anybody have any thoughts on who are the Daughters of Khaine? I'm going to say true allies, but that is maybe misleading because who's to say they have true allies at all? But what do you guys think?
I would want to say the Ideneth Deepkin because they have an arrangement, but some of the book also talks about how the Ideneth are building up forces around the capital of Agnar, for eventual retaliation, even though she gave back the lantern. But, so it's a little unclear whether they're actually allies or not.
And now she's not there, so who knows how long that's going to last.
If this book hadn't said anything about it, I would have assumed that eventually the Deepkin and the Daughters would have been like merged into a book like down the line. Like they would have been souped. But like the fact that they bring that up there makes me less inclined to believe that they'll be combined at one point, which is fine with me. I prefer them separate, so that's no problem in my book. And then would we call the Stormcast allies at this point, guys? What do you think?
I think Stormcast and Daughters of Khaine fit both into allies and enemies.
So frenemies, then, obviously.
Yeah.
Yep. Allies of convenience.
Okay. All right. If you guys say so. And are there any other allies out there that you can think of? They can ally with Lumineth, can't they? Which is absurd, right?
Yeah, it's not there yet, but they definitely can ally with Umbreneth. They have stories about that.
Sure.
So Malarion's faction, whenever we see that, it's the best we got for them right now.
And Sylvaneth, too. What do you know? All right. Allies maybe not as interesting, but I'll tell you what is interesting is the enemies. You're defined by who your enemies are. What enemies can we come up with for the Daughters of Khaine? What do you guys think?
Oh, definitely Slaanesh. Still an enemy. And there's even one of the factions, the Xanthar Kai, which are, I guess this is the first amongst the Scaithborn. They actually maintain a sect in the ruins over the valley where they fought a large Slaanesh host and defeated them just because Marathi is worried that Slaanesh will once again make its appearance there. This particular demon prince Lucius as well. So yeah, they're definitely Slaanesh is on our list of concerns.
I think it mentions at one point that she has a short list of like individuals with whom she has beef, some might say. And I do believe the newborn, which is to say those Slaaneshi twins that were ejected from Slaanesh when she was achieving her godhood, she does not. The dude does not abide, and by the dude I mean Marathi does not abide by apparently newborns, I guess, and so they're on her hit list essentially. They got a target on their back. So,
Right.
Personally, I would much rather see that fight go down than the Marathi Kragnos fight. So the fact that the timeline ended with the Shadow Queen rocketing off after Kragnos, I'm like, no, you're going the wrong way. That's not. Who cares?
Age of Beasts. It's all in Gur now. It's all in Gur.
Oh, it's lame.
When Malarian comes, it'll be Age of Shadow or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
Hopefully.
So Kragnos has been around for 15 minutes and somehow has a personal beef with everyone. He's speedrunning this whole thing.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just his personality.
I guess. Me and Kragnos have that in common. So speaking of enemies, she is also... it seems like she has a relatively short list. It's the newborns from Slaanesh, or the twins, that is, and Kragnos just made her list of things to do today. And so the Shadow Queen, like we said before, is off hunting centaurs. And let's see how that plays out. It didn't end well for her last time.
Nope. I would say, and the interesting thing about Marathi and the Daughters of Khaine is you can just, if you go to Games Workshop store page, open up the menu to see all of the factions and all of the different Grand Alliances, you can just copy and paste that into future enemies or unwitting enemies, and you're good to go.
Sure. I was following along. Will, I opened up the web store. I opened up all the factions, and I'm like, all right, what does he want me to do? Oh, he wants me to copy and paste. Okay, copy. All right, what now? Oh, wait, he's making a joke. You guys, he's making a joke. I get it. Okay, solid goof. All right, I guess if I was gonna say any other enemies, but I feel like that probably covers them at that point. Any other Daughters of Khaine abroad type thoughts before we maybe talk about how the lore intersects with the tabletop?
They did have one small point, which is that one of the sub-factions is all about fighting, and battle in particular has been accompanying a ton of Dawnbringer crusades. Not because they care about the Dawnbringers, not because they care about Sigmar, but because there's going to be a lot of fighting and a lot of people are going to die. So I want to be there so I can kill them. That was a fun one.
What faction is that?
Is it the Kraith?
Probably.
The Kraith.
Yeah.
Focused on poison and fighting.
And they think book learning is lame. What are you doing on all these temples? The temple is the battlefield. The temple is out there wherever your enemies are, and your knife at their throat. So they're all about that action. right, cool. Hey, guys, I know a lot of these, the models or units in the Daughters of Khaine book, not all, but many of them have been around for a while. But you know what? I have yet to ask anybody what their favorite ones are. So, I mean, you got your pick. You can take your choice. Which units or models, you can define it any way you want, but in this here Battletome, which are your guys' favorites? Tell me about them in great detail. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I like the Melusai Iron Scale, and just the Scathborn in general, but I like the idea that we have this actual general of the army now. The Blood Sisters and the Bloodstalkers are cool models, and I really like them, but I like that there is an actual hero of their type, because I feel like that was something that was specifically missing. And I know that's not from this book, but it is in particular one of my favorite units, because it gives some sort of hierarchy where there wasn't a hierarchy before. Because before it was, I'm making you all into these Scathborn, half snake, half women soldiers.
I think it's pronounced weemen.
Sorry, you're right, weemen. But there was no one to lead them, and now if Morathi wasn't there, but obviously Morathi can't be everywhere. So now we have a hero that actually does that, and the whole process of their being created by the Shadow Queen, and now there's possibly 2 different armies of the Scathborn wandering around.
Well, it's just the Medusae, and it's hard to, I guess they have slightly different powers, but it's just the Bloodrack Medusae that are made by the Shadow Queen. I don't think the Melusai are
fair,
which is an absurd distinction, but yeah,
it's hard to figure out. I'm not sure. I think the Medusae have the snakes, but the Melusai do not. But I think.
Yeah, you're right. The Melusai and the Blood Sisters and the Bloodstalkers are all made from that mother cauldron that the blood of Khaine goes into to create these Scathborn. But that's actually a point we didn't, I don't think, cover at any point, which was, I think, is super intriguing and can't wait to see what we see from this, which is that one of the big points in Broken Realms was that Morathi has this cauldron that every cauldron of blood, when there's blood put into it, it feeds off into this mother cauldron. And the mother cauldron was actually broken when she became a god. And there's a real question, a lot of talk in this book about, well, what happens now? Because they've talked about how she's trying to fix it, but it can't be fixed, or she doesn't know how to fix it. But that's a lot of where she gets all of her powers from. And that's how she creates more Blood Sisters, Bloodstalkers. So, and assumingly, that's also one of the things that causes the curse on the males within the Daughters of Khaine as well, right? Like, this seems to be the center of her power. So if that's broken, what else is going wrong? Like, can this godhood still exist? Like, does she still have godlike powers?
Right.
She's become a god.
And it even mentions in the sidebar, it says that, her attempts to repair the cauldron, they've birthed a host of malformed monstrosities that shriek and hiss in the depths of the Cthulhu, which is in the bowels of Hagnar, where they are fed a regular supply of Lethanim thralls, unfortunately. But it's like, okay, it's broken. She's trying to fix it, but instead she's making all these monsters and she's keeping them alive, So when might we see these monsters?
Who knows? And I think that's a good transition to the unit I want to talk about, which is the Doomfire Warlocks. Because we're going to talk about the Lethanim and we're going to answer a listener question at the same time.
Bam.
Which is, Kiribon asks, how high can a male advance in their society? And the answer is Suicide Squad, baby.
We should all be so lucky.
We should be so lucky. The description for Doomfire Warlocks just kind of talks about males in this society. It's the Daughters of Khaine. It's one of the 3 words that makes up the faction is a feminine word. And so what happens to all the guys? And the answer is Morathi only wants the worst, most broken souls to be used to create male elves. which are pretty much exploited for labor and are drained for blood.
And sacrifice, yeah.
Yeah, and sacrificed. If you're lucky enough to have just enough magical power, you will be cursed forever to live a life of agony and pain. But you do get a horse,
They're cool.
so it balances out.
Interestingly enough, in the Arena Shades text, it talks about them from a little differently, where it talks about the Doomfire Warlocks as being males that somehow gained power by pacts with the shadow, and then they're allowed to live, but they're given this mark to keep them from succumbing to shadow, so they can live, but it's very painful.
Yeah.
So it's very different actually than what was in the Battletome. So I thought that was an interesting divergence.
As we read, there's like two different versions because the mark is the Dam Kia, which is it gives them more power, but it does make them like more of a tied to their master, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the answer to how high can a male advance in their society, just get eaten by those half-elf monstrosities underneath the temple right now. That's the highest you can get in society as a male.
Yep.
Oh, very cool. Josh, did you already do one? No, you've just been talking. Do you have a favorite unit or model?
Very similar to Paul's. The Scathborn are really intriguing models. The Melusai, the half snake, and the harpy-like, the Kinnerai models are really cool. I think they're kind of fun divergence from what Daughters of Khaine were back in the world that was, and it's interesting their lore, how it's changed, and what they're looking forward to seeing what their involvement is in terms of the story going forward.
I will call out a unit, A, because they're relatively new, and B, because we got a question about them, but Tyromancer, patron of the show, thank you very much. He asks, aside from the events of Broken Realms Morathi, do we get any more information on the Shadow Stalkers and what they continue to do for her and any neat tidbits that are mentioned about them? So we honestly have touched a little bit. We talked about them a little bit before. We were surprised or delighted to see that they were sort of, I don't want to say shoehorned, but they were introduced earlier in the timeline that maybe we would have expected. They have been around since even the Age of Myth. So these Shadow Stalkers, they receive another mark. And we talk about how different, followers of Morathi, they get different marks. And so they receive the Shade Mark that allows them to travel the Umbral Web, which is a series of shadowy realm gates that are particularly treacherous and hard to navigate and hard to find even. And it's really only Morathi and Malarion that know how to navigate them. But she passes out this shade mark that allows these folks to travel the Umbral Web as well. But little do these individuals know that the more time that they spend in the Umbral Web, basically they're spelling their own doom, and eventually they're going to deteriorate into this living shadow. But they don't know that, and Morathi doesn't want them to know that. So they're doing all this traveling where it seems to be, slowly, if not killing them, slowly transforming them into something else. And I'd written down here, but we had mentioned it before, but the followers of Morathi are not the only ones that travel this Umbral Web, but Malarion has agents that use it as well, which is pretty legit. So, Tyromancer, I don't know how much of that we already knew versus whether this is just a repeat from other books, but it's worth sharing anyways. And also, they're just flat out cool. They basically are running errands for Morathi, anything that needs to get assassinated or spied on, because they really can get into all sorts of places with their shadow traveling. And so we see them in the Warcry. So obviously they have a presence in the 8 points. They were part of the Broken Realms Morathi story and how she was able to scout out where the Varanite was. But then also they are infiltrating the Nether Maze as well. In hunting down, I think, some rogue elves. I think Deepkin there as well. So she's got crack teams of Shadow Stalkers all over the place. So plus they're just flat out pretty neat looking. Anybody have anything to add about that? Other units that they want to talk about? Okay. That about sums it up. I guess maybe I'll throw in one more just as real quick. We talked about the High Gladiatrixes. It's worth calling out because that's the most new thing in this here book, in that it was introduced with the Arena Shades. The same way that Paul was talking about how he likes the Melusai Iron Scales, because they are sort of the lead. She's the leader of these really cool, units, the Blood Sisters and the Bloodstalkers. Now, the Sisters of Slaughter also have a hero model as well, right? So that those sisters are always gladiators in their own right. Now we've got this high gladiatrix to sort of lead them. So she empowers the sisters in the witch elves as well, which is pretty cool. Though I will say, I do hate whips. They're pretty terrible. I wish they'd stop putting whips on things.
So the other thing is that the high gladiatrix actually has no role in the army, as it were. Like, as opposed to the head queens or the slaughter queens, or even the Bloodrack Medusae, where they have some leadership role. This character is a hero, but they have no role in the church or in the worship of Morathi Khaine. They're just really good at killing things really well. And so when they go to battle, it's really their presence as opposed to any office that they possess that causes others to fight better around them, which I thought was a little interesting.
Yeah, like an aura buff.
Yeah, and it specifically calls out that there's no like promotion ceremony. Like, oh, you went from a gladiatrix to a high gladiatrix. No, it's just, oh, hey, that person kills a lot. They're here with us. I guess we fight better now. It's like not a rank, so to speak.
Any other units or models or things that folks want to talk about on that front? Because if not, this is normally where we talk about the sub-factions, but I think we actually covered quite a bit of them. However, and this is a little out of order, sorry everybody, but this is where I had written down all the questions that people were asking about the potential for anti-Morathi schisms. But guess what? We really kind of talked at length about that already, but I would be remiss if I didn't give these folks a chance to at least ask their questions. And so Darth Alec asked, have they expanded on any anti-Morathi schisms? I just said that. Carrion asked, are there examples of infighting in the Daughters of Khaine nation in the Battletome? And Kiraban asked, do splinter groups still revere Khaine, or are they throwing in with another god? I think that's all summed up in a lot of what was talked about when we were chatting about the Calibron, and how they're hunting out different, blasphemous sects of the Daughters of Khaine, and they're worshiping Moraheg, sometimes worshiping Khaine, and Morathi is still, even to this day, even being a goddess herself, is still maybe nervous isn't, but is wary of letting folks know that she herself is not necessarily the second coming of Khaine, but her own thing. Because if those followers of Khaine found out, even a goddess wouldn't necessarily be able to stand up to like the retribution that her followers would, turn on her. So, I know we've talked a lot about it already, but does anybody have any final thoughts, at least as it relates to the infighting or schisms in the Daughters of Khaine?
Yeah, I think just to reinforce the fact that only in Hagnar is she kind of regarded as the reborn goddess Morathi Khaine. I think a lot of the other factions, it kind of hints at the fact that they're still worshiping Khaine, and they recognize that she is, their leader, but they don't necessarily believe that she's Khaine reborn. So I think there are still factions that are worshiping Khaine, and they worship her as an aspect of that, but not as a new goddess.
Wasn't there a story where like someone stood up to her and said, "Hey, I know you're not Khaine, or I know you're not the embodiment of Khaine," and she goes, "Oh, yeah, cool, let's talk about it." And so the objector rolls up, and there's a bunch of avatars of Khaine standing around, and then Morathi controls the avatars and orders them to like just smash the
slice her into pieces.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, slice her up, and like so like. Khaine or not, I still got control over these avatars. So
right.
That was exactly all the proof that anybody needed.
And the objector messed up because the objector said, like, yeah, only Khaine can control these avatars. Probably should have double checked that first before they said anything.
Famous last words.
Right.
Speaking of Morathi, I know folks wanted to talk about this. The sort of splitting, and again, we've dabbled on it, but maybe we can dive deep specifically because Darth Alec is asking about it. But he was asking, does the book give any more hints on who split Morathi apart when she split from her Shadow Queen to Morathi Khaine? I don't think it does. Do you guys glean any insight?
It specifically didn't mention any of the details that we had in Broken Realms, actually.
Yeah. It's less specific.
Yeah, even more vague. He also asked, how many snakes does she have in her hair? Which, I don't know the answer. But then he does ask, does the book even talk about it, though? Does the book talk about the snakes in her hair? It mentions it once, but it doesn't give any insight behind it, I don't think, at least as far as I can tell.
Only as part of the Shadow Queen, and that the snakes biting the designated Mulusai is what changes him to the blood rack Medusa.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. Right on.
So it's like the poison coming out from those snakes from her hair transformed them into the Medusa.
These are some simpler questions leading into something a little bit more interesting, I think, is that does everyone know that Morathi is two people now? I think the book talks about it. What do you guys think?
I don't think everybody knows. She knows, but it said in the book that she presented the Shadow Queen. A lot of people thought that it was some shadow demon or something, or some creature from the realms that she has control over. I don't think people really understand that it's her.
Yeah.
Except for the Scathborn. The Scathborn, I think, all know because they're 100% loyal.
Well, and it is a continuation of where before she hid the fact that she could turn into the Shadow Queen, right? When they were literally of one body, she never wanted anybody to know that, like, that was what her true nature was. And so she is continuing that obfuscation, and now nobody really knows that is also one half of her split soul either. So that's pretty cool. And do you guys have we rung Morathi out? Is there any other Morathi topics that we want to talk about?
I mean, I just had a thought, like, going into conspiracy theory.
Please do.
So, like, people don't know that the Shadow Queen is also her. They think it's this big monster. So when it flies away to Gur and then she starts chasing it, I wonder what people think is going on. Like, do they think she lost her pet? Could it be seen as, like, the shadow beast is leading the charge and Morathi follows? Like, now I want to know more about, like, people's perception of this relationship, especially as the Shadow Queen starts developing her own agenda.
Yeah, true. You know what, listeners, if you want to write that story, I'm pretty sure we'll read it, unless Will writes it first.
Nope, I will not.
So there's an interesting double meaning that would not necessarily play to American audiences, but that would actually play to British audiences.
I don't think you can make that claim, but okay.
So shadow has more than one meaning in terms of governance. Every member of parliament, and in parliament, they have secretaries. So we have our Secretary of State here, but they have secretaries of transportation and stuff in the UK, right? But that's for the party that's in charge. For the party that's not in charge, they have a shadow secretary whose entire point is to argue the opposite of what the person in charge is arguing. Is to give a good conversation back and forth.
Like devil's advocate.
Correct.
Okay.
And so since we now have Morathi Khaine, who's the god, but we also have the Shadow Queen, who's the god, right? Like, it actually plays off of that the Shadow Queen is now arguing against what Morathi Khaine wants to do at this point.
Yeah, they are opposite emotional sort of
Correct.
Too.
Yep.
All right, very cool. Does anybody have anything else to add about Morathi? Point one. Point two, does anybody have any other general points of interest? It doesn't have to be about Morathi at all, though. Don't let her hear that. But any other tidbits from the book that you all found interesting before I dive into some additional listener questions?
Well, so we had talked about the Mother Cauldron, but I think something that I'm really intrigued to see how they follow it up is that the Mother Cauldron also somehow siphons half the soul of the Leonatham when they are born. And so with the bowl broken, what's happening to those souls?
Right. We have more strong males being born.
Yeah.
We might have more strong males being born. Yep.
Or male monsters being born under
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
either or.
Well, and the blood is probably still coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is the bottom of Hagnar going to flood with blood?
The blood flood.
Yeah, blood flood.
The blood flood.
Classic. We've all been there.
Right.
All right, let's ask some more listener questions. We got to get through them. So here's a couple that are semi-related, and gosh, we kind of touched on these already, but I gotta ask them. I don't want anybody to miss out. Ricky from the Discord had asked, why do they still call themselves the Daughter of Khaine now that Morathi has ascended? As a god of near singular ego, it seems counterintuitive that all our followers bear another god's name. Could have talked about this earlier. I think generally it's because not everyone really holds her up as the goddess, even though she is a goddess. But they still have their faith in Khaine, and she only has her authority because she is the re-embodiment of Khaine. So her authority is coming from that connection still, even though she's ascended in her own way.
Here's a called shot, Scry. 6th edition is when they're going to move it to Daughters of Marathi.
Or there's a subschism where like there is Khaine and Marathi. I don't know. Wiz Warrior from this Discord, who I might point out, here's a new designation. They are a server booster, which is not a patron, but something a little different. They boost the Discord server. They ask, subsuming Khaine as an appendix to her name, is that just Marathi-styled propaganda in her pursuit to consolidate even more power beyond what mere apotheosis provides? First of all, great vocabulary. Second of all, I think, yeah, that's literally what we were just saying, in that she's still, even from her own, from her own accomplishment, so to speak, she still has to hold on to that Khaine name to ensure that like the entirety of her faction is supporting her.
Yeah, even in some of the text, it even says at the beginning she knew Khaine was dead, and all that. All they had left was the heart, so she just completely used the name to gain power.
Yep, exactly, and that's still the case these days. They ask, is Khaine just another dead god? And I think that's true.
Well, but the other thing is that Marathi can't come out and say that she's a god, because that would imply that at some point she wasn't, right? And so the tension with the followers of Mariah Hegg is that she claims she's the rebirth of Khaine. She is the reincarnation of Khaine. And so she's not subsuming Khaine as an appendix. It is a title stating that I am the new Khaine.
Yep.
Right? Like I which does still imply a change. So it is interesting. But yeah, so it's not necessarily just propaganda, but also it is exactly propaganda. And so even though she finally is a god, she still has to pretend that another god is giving her power.
So what a tough position to find yourself in. Switching gears entirely, brand new theme, but we got a couple questions about Malarion, the god of shadow. So Carrion asks, do we get any hint of the coming of Malarion in the Battletome? Kelborn asks, any repercussions between Marathi Khaine and Malarion, or rather, does he show up in any way? Chrisling asks, how has Marathi's relationship with Malarion developed since her ascension? And to all of those, I say, I have no idea. I'm not sure. I don't know that it's really touched on much in this book. His name is brought up in the Battletome on occasion, especially in the early days, like the Age of Myth. But he seems strangely...
Shadow Stalkers.
Yeah, exactly. But he seems relatively strangely absent from current events, which is probably by design, right, from Games Workshop's perspective. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, no, we got nothing.
He's coming soon, or something like that.
I think there's probably bigger, a lot more between now and when Malarion shows up. Other focuses for now. Kelborn asks, anything new about Ulgu in general? And that's a pretty broad question, but did you guys come up with anything new about Ulgu? I didn't know too much about these strongholds in Ulgu, though maybe other people did, and it was just new to me. But did you guys find anything new about the realm at all in this book?
I think they touched on a lot of the like Umbra Web and other things before. But one of the things that Will brought up is the Umbranathi warriors. Which is an interesting name because we have like the Karnathi warriors. So what is the distinction? These warrior types, and what would that look like? Yeah. So that's something we hadn't seen.
I was going to say I'm looking at this beautiful map in the Battletome.
Ooh, so
and
gorgeous. Just
in huge bold letters, it looks like Olgaroth is just the name of the area.
Oh no!
There's the Olgaroth spiral and then Greater Olgaroth as like part of the continent.
Don't ruin it for me, Will.
But just warriors from the region. Okay.
We were having fun.
We were so close. Well, because I wanted to call out, like, since this is my first time reading a DOK Battletome, there's just literal blood splatter on the map showing the blood going to Marathi, and I love it.
Yeah. Again, here's a topic that we had kind of touched on before. Man, my questions are really out of order this episode, but a few about Arena of Shades. Wiz Warrior, again, the server booster, was asking, is there any more to be said about Harkuron, Nate, Ambelgard than what was provided in the Arena of Shades booklet? I think covered it pretty exhaustively there up above, and used Arena of Shades to talk about it as well. So like we learned a bit both from this Battletome and that booklet from the box set. Mealhern asks, does the Battletome build on events of Arena of Shades, or is this just a paragraph in the book? I don't know that Arena of Shades is in the Battletome at all, right?
It's not even a paragraph in this book.
Nope.
Yeah,
It takes
right?
after the Battletome, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, quite possibly. I think on occasion we'll get those battle box stories as a timeline, paragraph or a timeline story if we're lucky, and we weren't lucky this time. So sorry, Mealhern.
I'm even going to say like the opposite in regards to, is there more about Harkonnen and the Battletome? And I will say that there might actually be more information in the Arena of Shades booklet, because it really goes into it has more words to spend on what that relationship with the city is like.
Yeah, true. That's a good point. Yeah, exactly. So it's a good thing that we were able to sneak in a read of it before we talked about it.
Yeah.
And Mealhorn asked another question that I always like asking: is there foreshadowing for new armies? Maybe one of the new books, and a surprise with a hint already in this book. However, although I like asking the question, I inevitably don't like the answer, in that, like, I don't know that I see any foreshadowing. Do you guys see foreshadowing here?
No, I mean, the Gitz story was pretty cool. Maybe that's something that will make it into a Gitz Battletome at some point. But I didn't see anything that jumped out as like, oh, this is super cool. Oh, this is super interesting. I think that Will pointed out that one of the continents is named this, so we actually know specifically where that there is a specific force of Malarion in a specific place. That's kind of...
I would say the closest thing we have to a hint is if we get a Seasons of War based in Olgu, we have a lot of little pieces of information that could possibly be built out. And that's being very generous.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and then thinking back, like in the Land of Illusions section earlier on, it does point out that the Daughters of Khaine have a lot of conflict with the Cruel Boys, Slaanesh, and Eshin. And of course, people have been hoping for some Eshin stuff, so that it could be foreshadowing, more involvement with Eshin and Olgu.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgotten I had written it down, but I didn't bring it back up. It's maybe not convenient, but the fact that we got the Underworld's warband and then the character from the new box set, they're giving some attention to Eshin, so maybe that means something eventually. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's more to come in that Skaven book that is supposed to be coming this summer. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
If you do want more about Olgu, I would almost read Harrow Deep, the Harrow Deep lore for Underworlds, right? Because that's in this specific area, and then there's also a Black Library novel about it too, to kind of explore a little bit more.
Hey, actually, Paul, hold up. That would be a great time to talk about any Black Library recommendations that we might have. So you had meant, so go ahead. Don't leave it unnamed. What was the second thing you were talking about?
So I was talking about the Harrow Deep short story collection, which I read and I enjoyed as well. And then if you wanted something not Olgu specific, but actually Daughters of Khaine specific, the Gotrek series actually has a companion named Malineth, who is a daughter of Khaine, but also an Order of Vizier member. So there's an interesting dichotomy there that you can run through and read those stories.
Is she a daughter of Khaine, or does she want to be a daughter of Khaine?
She's definitely a daughter of Khaine. Mm-hmm. She's also an Order of Sigmar agent. Mm-hmm. So she's taken Sigmar, but she still very much fights and very much acts and very much gets power from bloodletting to the daughter of Khaine.
Oh. Yeah, gross.
Even in the book just released, which is an interesting side note.
Very cool. If we're gonna, or I'll ask, does anybody else have any other Black Library recommendations for folks who want to learn more about the Daughters of Khaine? Because I'm going to read these that I have right in front of me. All right, here I go. So there was a kind of like the Harrow Deep compilation. There's a compilation of a few novellas called The Covens of Blood by Anna Stevens, Leanne Merciel, and Jamie Crisali. It's one of those I should read the names before I try reading them out loud to make sure I read them correctly. But it's a 1, 2, 3 short series of like novellas that are about the Daughters of Khaine. I haven't necessarily read all of them, but it's Daughters of Khaine on the cover, so there's got to be some good information in there. I got to believe it. And then there was also a short story called Oracle, which is about, I think, the ramifications of what happened after Harkuron falls. That one I did read, and I did like, because it was a series of short stories about and around the Broken Realms, and I was all gung ho about Broken Realms, and so that really made me like the short stories. And so this is the Marathi specific one. I'm talking about the events therein. So that was another recommendation from me. And if there are no other Black Library recommendations, guys, I think we're at the home stretch. We might give our little review of what we thought of the book here. Paul, you're at the top of my list always. What'd you think of the Daughters of Khaine Battletome?
I really enjoyed this Battletome because it gave a lot more information about Harkhiran than I expected. And the whole book just opened talking about Harkhiran and the events of Broken Realms. And typically when we have done Battletomes in the past, that's always been at the end and much less information at the end. So I really appreciated that this book was intentionally set in the perpetual now, as opposed to starting in the past and moving up into the perpetual now. So I enjoyed that quite a bit. So I would probably give it 8 out of 10 blood drops from the Heart of Khaine.
Oh, nice. I forgot about the rating system. Oh no. It's not that I won't be listening to you guys' reviews, but I'm going to be sitting here trying to think of what my rating system is. All right, excellent. Who's going to be next? I think it will be Josh. What did you think of the Battletome?
I also enjoyed it. I thought it was really nice to see progression of the story from, she's a goddess now. We know that. Petard partook in Excelsis, and it actually continued the story. It's like, okay, this is what it's like now in Hagnar. There are factions that don't agree with her. There's, rebellions in Hardcover. So I like the fact that they've, advanced the story and that it's not all, roses. She's got all this conflict and there's this disruptions and not everybody believes she is who she is. So I think that's kind of leads lots of seeds for future opportunities. It'll be interesting to see how, Malarian and his factions interact with that information when it comes out. So I give it 5 out of 6 Daughters of Khaine factions.
Okay, pretty good. Will, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I really liked how this book, in setting up that there are fractures in the Daughters of Khaine and setting up their relations with other armies and factions and how they kind of do their propaganda, that it really feels like this is more than just Marathi plus other elves. It really feels like a unique and independent culture and group. And I really loved a lot of the stories that were shared and how it really is giving an identity to the people that would follow Marathi and the Cult of Khaine. So with that being said, I'm going to give it 900 out of 1,000 cuts.
Oh no, that's too many cuts. All right, what did I think of the book? So I think it is an above average Battletome. We get a fair number of, and they're not churning him up, but we get them relatively quickly. And there's a difference between a Battletome that they're just trying to catch the army up with 3rd edition in terms of rules and make sure that they have all the bells and whistles for the game. And it's a difference between that and army books where they have some bit of story spotlight currently, they're movers and shakers in the actual events that are occurring right now. And this one, I think, leans towards the latter versus the former, in that it does have things to say about current events. It has things to say about, recent events, but it also exclusively doesn't lean on the things that we knew already. It does dabble in a little bit about, revealing new things and not just token, oh, this is what they feel about Cruel Boy showing up, but rather there's more to it than that. And because of that, I'll give it higher marks because it does offer some glimpses into some things that we didn't know before. And I'm not just saying that because I didn't read the other Battletomes, but I think there's still new things in here, period. So that is a point to its credit. It doesn't necessarily push the story per se forward, but I think I've said this before in previous Battletomes. I'm not sure Battletomes are ever going to do that. That's not really the job of the Battletomes, and I need to stop thinking that they'll ever accomplish that because I don't think they will. So because of that, I'm coming to terms with things like that. I enjoyed it a little bit more. Again, it's never going to go toe to toe with, or it's never going to be ranked as highly as a brand new army or a brand new faction. It just can't because I'm a sucker for those new things. And so in doing so, I think, again, squarely above average, it does what I hope Battletomes will do, which is to say it gives me things I knew, but it sprinkles enough new on top of it to make it worthwhile. So with that being said, I don't know, maybe I'll give it, I lied. I said I was going to think about my rating system and I totally didn't. It's I don't know, maybe like a 10 out of 13. Is it the 13 regions of Ulgu or
Ulgu? Yep.
Yeah, or like islands or something. So that's what I'll give it 10 out of 13.
So I have a question for you guys.
Hit me, don't literally hit me.
Did this read as an order battle tome?
No, but I don't care about the distinction of order battle tomes anymore. I mean,
Yeah, that's fair.
4 years ago, maybe I would have cared, but I don't know that I care anymore.
Because that was the thing that struck me through the whole thing is this very much felt like a standalone faction as opposed to something of an alliance. And typically those are more like destruction-y battle tomes. And so that was intriguing to me as well.
I was gonna say, I didn't do it. I'll be the judge of that all episode, but I don't know that it applies on that one. So I might have to say, I'll be the judge of that, and then I'll splice it in earlier to some other time that you said.
I'm sure I said a bunch of things.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Excellent. So does anybody else have any other final thoughts before we close her out? Last chance. Oh no, you missed it. It's time for our reforging. If Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on Discord or drop a tip on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter at The Mortal Realms. And Paul, where can they find you online?
At PJ Shard.
And Josh, where can they find you online?
At J.E. Arrington.
Wilkin, where can they find you?
At Severilon.
And I'm Aaron, and you can find me on Twitter at Dosesos, and you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com. Oh yeah, what's worse is because I'm not even done with the last Pocket Realms. So I now after night we'll have 3 episodes in the hopper that need to be edited out, which is why I was so
on
desperate.
one of those off on Davy. Davy, you do this one.
No, I don't trust him. I've listened to his show. I think I'll be okay. Sure.
I did notice something that is going to bother me for a while, which is I've been staring at this map trying to find Harrow Deep.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. But right next to Hagnar is Deep Harrow.
Oh no.
No, really?